what I do, I don't think it's for everybody. It's a commitment. It's a half a day.
Yeah.
And if you've only got a handful of days or a long weekend in Charleston, that's a commitment.
Oh, it's a full day because you have to do the walk, and then you have to eat the incredible food, and then you have to take a 2-hour nap.
And then you have to take a nap
Yeah,
afterwards.
yeah.
Because I put the beat down on people.
Well, it's a lot. You go walk and then you eat a whole bunch, have a couple of glasses of wine, and it's like, oh my goodness, you're pretty much worthless after that.
But
Welcome to P&L, Priorities and Lifestyle, with your host, Rob Schultz. Rob is the founder and president of Schultz Wealth. All opinions expressed by Rob and his guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Schultz Wealth Limited. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Please refer to our website for more information.
Welcome everybody to P&L, Priorities and Lifestyle. I'm your host, Rob Schultz, and today I have Chef Forrest Parker with me, also known as Gump.
that's right.
Yeah, everybody here locally just kind of calls you
Calls me
Gump.
Gump.
I mean, I've been out on the street with you. We'll tell a story about how we got to meet, but people yell out of their cars at you, "Hey, Gump!" It's a really cool deal. And if you're watching this and not listening to it, you'll notice that we're not in the normal studio. We are in beautiful Charleston, South Carolina, in beautiful October. And I can't imagine a more beautiful place to be.
This is exactly the time of year. April and October, I'll tell anybody, are the most amazing times to be in Charleston.
It's been phenomenal. I've been here so long now. I've been here for 3 weeks now. I'm not sure I want to go home.
You shouldn't. You should stay.
Should I stay?
Hang out.
Well, and the reason why we are here is because Shelly and I just love this town. And we were talking the other night, and it sounds like you fell in love with this town around about the same time we did in the early 90s.
Sure, yeah. That's when I came down here. My college roommate at Anderson College grew up here on Water Street, and we're just like, you've got to come, you've got to see this. And so I spent a summer just tooling around south of Broad in Charleston, and it put the zap on me then, and it continues to put the zap on me now.
But you didn't just come here immediately, right? Why don't you give us some background on kind of, now you're a chef, you're very well known here in South Carolina. As a matter of fact, and we'll talk about a little bit, number of distinctions and awards going all the way up to the top guy at the governor level, right? Mm-hmm, you are, what are you? You're the ambassador of...
I'm a 2016 chef ambassador for the state of South Carolina, appointed by Governor Nikki Haley, then Governor Nikki Haley.
That is so cool.
Which was such a cool honor.
Yeah. And then you run Undiscovered Charleston here, which is a foodie tour beyond... It's the most amazing food experience I had ever had up until last night when you cooked for my friends last night. That hit the top level, by the way. That was so cool. But Undiscovered Charleston is something that you discovered through a process of going from being a chef, working as a chef, and then transitioning to an entrepreneur and having your own gig, right?
Yeah, and in the sense that some people say that things happen for a reason, and in my case, I think it was just kind of a gradual process. So I came to college, I transferred to college at Charleston in the mid '90s, and was working my way through school as a tour guide, as a carriage driver, and so I really fell in love with the city. I fell in love with its peoples, its history, and really was just having the time of my life, giving carriage tours and going to college at Charleston. And then it was a slow season, so I had to pick up some hours on the side to keep the lights on. And I didn't have a lot of cooking experience, but I had a little, and that was enough for me to get my foot in the door with Chef Louis Osteen. And so Louis Osteen was one of the really formative chefs of the dining scene in Charleston. He's one of the first of the James Beard chefs to come from here.
Okay.
And so he was the original chef of the Charleston Grill, and had left to open his own restaurant across the street, and this is in '97. And so that's really when I got my foot in the door with him, and we did it right. He designed this beautiful modernist space that was so stunning. We were plating on expensive Limoges china from Paris and Villeroy and Boch china from Luxembourg, and We made our soup stocks and sauces from scratch. We cured and preserved our own duck confit. So as a young culinarian, that's a huge imprint on me. That was incredibly formative. But like one of his signature dishes, and I'll never forget this dish, was crispy pulled preserved duck in Madeira red eye gravy on creamy grits. And so we preserved the duck with salt, sugar, and spices, cooked it down in its own fat in the classic method to preserve it. And then we would pull that, and when the ticket rang in, we put a 4-ounce handful of that shredded duck in this ripping hot cast iron skillet, got it nice and super crispy, and then we deglazed with Madeira wine and then red eye gravy from country ham drippings and coffee, and reduced that, and then mounted in a big spoonful of butter at the end and swirled around, made a pan sauce with it. So it wasn't anything to look at. It was an exercise in beige and brown. But it was so freaking delicious.
That just screams low country right there.
Totally. And in the fall right now, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
But when we plated that, we were plating it on Quaker quick grits because that's what there was. There wasn't any locally raised and milled stone ground anything. And so we had this idea that we knew as an industry and as a city that we knew what the food of the South was, and we knew what the food of the Low Country was, because those recipes and the old texts had been preserved. But we didn't really know what those dishes taste like because in many cases the ingredients those were made from had been extinct for 100 years.
Yeah.
And so fast forward, and now because of the work of groups like Slow Food USA and the Southern Foodways Alliance and the Carolina Gold Rice Foundation, many of those ingredients have now been repatriated and restored. And so we have a much better understanding. The problem before us today as an industry is whether or not the kids want to show up to do the work. But I think that's pretty much
that's
universal.
everywhere. That's pretty much everywhere right now.
Yeah.
But so that's amazing. And I remember when we did the Undiscovered Charleston tour with you, you're a real student of this stuff. I mean, you have all these original menus and cookbooks and so forth where you can go back and reference and then come back and, kind of make it your own. You always do that, but you've got this incredible base of just history here in food that's pretty unique, I think.
I think so too. And when I was a kid, if history class had involved food, I would have paid so much more attention because I obviously love food. I'm a big guy. But it's one of the most universal ways in which we can relate with one another is, what we eat, what's for supper. So I just made it a point to collect old menus and to really kind of dig in. There's so much here, and Charleston's got such a long history that makes it such a really special place.
Yeah, no, we've had so much fun here over the years coming to eat and just hang out. It's fantastic.
And the dining scene continues to change and evolve, so I think it's relevant.
Yeah. So you had the tour guide experience really early on, worked through the chef ranks, and most of it here in Charleston, right? But you did also go elsewhere.
So I started here working with Lewis, and at the time there's 2 culinary schools. So in 97 and 98, you couldn't make a living as a line cook to save your life. How times have changed. But then I had a colleague who had worked with me at Lewis's that got a job up in Native American gaming in Michigan. And he's like, you've got to come check this out because the pay is great, the benefits are great, the whole bit. And I was like, that's awesome. And so I went after it. But it's funny because sometimes you don't realize the benefits of what you have right in front of you. And, I get up to the middle of a cornfield in the middle of Michigan and, 8 months of winter, and it's gray and it's cold and it's rainy. And it was a culture shock for sure. So, but I spent 5 years in Michigan. I spent 5 years in the Twin Cities working in gaming there, and then was exec chef at Opryland for 5 years in Nashville through the flood in 2010. And that was its own amazing experience because we rebuilt, remediated, and reopened that property in less than 6 months, which I'd never care to repeat that experience, but I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah, it had to have been incredible.
And just an amazing, people sometimes say that corporate culture is an oxymoron, but I learned firsthand the benefits of having the right people and the right leaders in the right places.
Yeah. And then you all pretty much all this time were you trying to maybe get back here, or was it in the back of your mind?
It was always on my mind because I
Yeah.
loved it so much here.
Yeah.
When we came back here in 2011, and then I started with Frank Lee at the Old Village Post House in 2012.
Okay.
And then started the blog in 2012 and was just, Undiscovered Charleston starts as a blog. So I'm just writing about the dining scene in Charleston from the perspective of somebody who actually works here in the industry and knew a little bit about the history. So I didn't know about search engine optimization. I didn't know about web design. I just got a little WordPress thing and started writing. And if it stuck, great. And if not, then whatever. And then apparently along the way, Governor Haley found the blog and apparently must have thought, well, this is a novel idea, a chef that likes to read and write. And then I get the phone call from the governor's office naming me a chef ambassador in 2016. But I was really blessed because to work with both Frank Lee and Louis Osteen are kind of two of the godfathers of the dining scene in Charleston. That was an amazing experience.
Yeah. And then when did you start combining food with a tour? What year was that?
So I started the business just prior to the pandemic.
Okay.
Of all the times to start a new business,
Well,
why
of course.
not?
Yeah, sure.
Let's go. Let's party.
Yeah.
And then I think that, and it's the same kind of stories you hear about people starting businesses. I mean, I make mistakes on a regular basis. I'm not the most active on social media. Best practices sometimes fall by the wayside. We make mistakes.
What I've found is that I just kind of stopped doing what actually worked, just for no other reason, but just because, right?
You get
It just makes no sense.
you get swamped. You tell yourself you get busy, you get tired. The hours are. I mean, on paper it's a half day experience, but every day for me is still very much a chef day because I'm up at 4. I'm out the door by 5. I'm loading in by 6. I meet the group at 9. Prepping, cleaning, give the tour, cook, clean, serve, break down, and then try to get reset for the next day. So by the time I'm done, I mean, my candle's burning pretty low at the end of the day, and I'm pretty shot. So there's not a lot left in the tank to respond to social media, create original content, that kind of stuff. And so you get tired and fatigued, and some best practices fall by the wayside.
Yeah.
And it's just, I tell anybody that asks, I'm like, I'm better than anybody I know at making mistakes because I do it on a daily basis.
Well, I think we all do. It's just kind of part of the process. Now, are you on your business? Are you pretty much a one-man show on this? Or
For now, it's just me. I mean, I am hopeful to scale modestly, and I've had some interest from some outside folks about doing what I do here in other places. So there's some regional interest, but there's also been some interest in Europe.
Oh, wow.
So that would be really cool, and when I look like down the line and I'm trying to game plan, what this could look like 5, 10, 15 years from now, I think ideally to put myself in a position where I can kind of kick back a little bit, move to a new place, set up the business, and live someplace like Portugal for 6 months and set up Undiscovered Lisbon, put the right team together, give them the tools that they need, hire the right people, and then get out of the way and try not to screw it up from there.
I think that's the hardest part, especially like in service industry, like both of us are, is breaking out and being able to, increase your economy of scale, because the business is just so much you.
It consumes you,
I mean,
absolutely.
and it is you. I mean, it's not like, well, I'm not feeling so good today, so I'm going to let somebody else go do the Undiscovered Charleston tour.
There's no, if you don't,
there's
if you don't
no
work,
way.
you don't get paid. It doesn't happen.
And there's not anybody else that can really do it at the level that you do it.
And it's hard too, because the passion piece is so important, because that is what will get you through the 18 and 20 hour days.
Yeah.
Is having that passion piece. And in that regard, like, there's an element of the business that, like, the actual, like, giving the tour and meeting guests and, like, walking around this beautiful city, that part's easy, because it's hard not to do that and not love it. And cooking for people is just in my DNA. So that part's easy. But the nitty gritty stuff, like sales and marketing and content creation and social media, like all of those things that are just common everyday best practices is just, you know, that's when you feel like you need to clone yourself. But because it's just you wear a lot of hats. And so you have to become, pretty quickly, you have to become a subject matter expert in some degree in all these different aspects.
Yeah, and then hopefully, eventually, you're able to hire some people into those spots.
That's that's the plan.
Yeah, that's the key. Is either that or, like you said,
Because then you can continue to play to your strengths,
yeah,
right?
yeah, you play to your strengths, and then you become. It sounds like maybe even more of a coach on how to repeat this in other areas with other talent, I guess you could say, which is out there, and there are people that know, Lisbon food left and right.
Better than I do.
Yeah,
Sure.
you would think, and you just have to get them all set up, and you put together the machine. That would be really cool.
That would be really cool. And then live a nomadic, people talk about the digital nomadic VPN lifestyle.
Yeah,
I mean, go live in Spain for 6 months, go live in Kyoto for 6 months. I mean, that would be pretty kind of cool, I think.
yeah, that would be really cool.
And then, of course, the other 6 months I would be back here, but this is home.
Right, right. Yeah, and that travel and food combination thing obviously there's a huge demand for that. I mean, people are very intrigued by that. You go back to the, Anthony Bourdain's Parts Unknown and stuff, all the different ways that chefs have learned how to combine that travel and food piece. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm traveling and eating. It's awesome, so there's a huge demand for it out
Absolutely.
there. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's one of the questions I get on the tour quite a bit is like, you're a chef, where do you go?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And there's high-end places that we love to go, but then there's so many under the radar chef's day off kind of dives that people haven't heard about. It's like to be able to share that with people, that's really special.
That's been fun being here as long as we have. You can't eat a 5-star meal every single day.
And I just don't want to.
I mean, you could, but yeah, it gets, and then going and finding all the cool, there's a grocery store down here where we got a hot dog the other day. Burbage's, yeah. That was fun.
It's the oldest corner store in the city.
Yeah. It's so cool. You walk in and it's like, well, this is probably what a grocery store looked like in, at the turn of the century.
100 years ago.
100, the prior turn of the century.
Right, yeah.
I mean, it's just so cool. Yeah, all that is really fun. Well, that's interesting. So, we were talking about just trying to scale and move up, and how hard and challenging that can be. But yet, like you said, the passion, the desire, knowing that you're comfortable, you really like where you are and what you're doing. That's kind of the fuel that keeps you going to push through and make these things happen.
It is for me, yeah.
Yeah, me too, for sure. But some guys on the entrepreneurial level will argue against that passion piece. And it's mainly the ones that come at business strictly from a business perspective. And they'll go, okay, well, and I know people like this. They have a business that, makes wickets or whatever it may be. They have zero passion for what their business actually does. It's more about the financial gain, and it's more about the business itself, being in business, learning how to do the finance, et cetera, and so forth, to take it from point A to point B. And I will argue that sometimes, those of us who are really passionate about what we do, sometimes we miss that.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean,
I think sometimes we're our own worst enemy, and because there are decisions that need to be made from a business standpoint that don't quite completely align up with the true passion for what we're doing.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. In fact, there's a Stanford series I did on how to start a startup. And even though I'm not a tech guy, I'm not a coder, startup culture has interested me for many years because I think in many ways I think of startups and restaurants as analogous. And
Absolutely. I mean, every new restaurant is a startup.
essentially,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So this is the Y Combinator people who are tied to Sequoia Capital out in Silicon Valley. And they have this sort of collision think tank where they bring in new talent and they kind of run them through the ringers about how to start a startup. And so they actually did a series of classes with these and put them up on like Apple University. And some of the things were, a lot of things, frankly, were above my head, but there were a lot of things that found resonance with me. And the first thing they tell you, in fact, I think they have these framed inside the Y Combinator classrooms, is it's the first rule of startups is make something people want.
Right.
And so in my case, I got lucky in the sense that I was really passionate about two things, about food and about Charleston and its history. But nobody seemed to be doing anything to really kind of connect those. There were a handful of chefs here like Sean Brock who were really going deep on the historic grains.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like super widespread. And I was really passionate about those two things. People in the tourism industry weren't really talking about the history of the food. There were a couple established food tours, but at the time they weren't like digging into the history as much.
Right. I mean, you'd come to Charleston, I would suppose, and it's beautiful and the food's great, but you don't really get a feel for the true history or the ancient grains.
It was, it was really kind of on the surface. It was the classic food tour model of 3 hours, 6 restaurants, and at the time, there's no real kind of connecting narrative.
Yeah.
And so I felt so deeply that there had to be something about this connection of food and history, but nobody really seemed to be actively doing anything about it. And that's really kind of what first pushed me to kind of come up with this. And there were a couple, kind of one-off events I did with some groups that seemed to kind of be cool. And then what really struck me was I had a colleague, a friend I'd worked with who'd been a senior editor with National Geographic, and he was in town. We were catching up, and I said, well, my tour guide license isn't active anymore, so I can't technically take you on a tour. But if you want to go for a walk, and just like, let me show you around some of this stuff. And of course, just me being me, my narrative came back again and again in any way I could think of about food. And then we were done. He thanked me. He was like, this has been an amazing morning. He said, let me tell you what. He's like, this needs to be a tour, and you need to be the person to give this tour. And that stuck in my head. And that's where it
That's where it started. Okay. Yeah.
And then from there, it just kind of continued to form up. And then, the more I dug, the deeper the rabbit hole went. And 4 years later, pandemic notwithstanding.
Yeah.
And I think the model for the tour really kind of helped navigate that, because we walk, we spend it's a 4-hour half-day experience, and we spend the first 2 hours winding our way through the city, seeing some of the same things you'd see on some of the other tours, but we're really talking about the history of Charleston as it relates through the lens of food. And then as we get back to the little bistro and I set up and I cook lunch, then we talk about the food of Charleston as it relates through the lens of history.
Well, and we eat it too.
And with wine.
It's so fun.
And so, and then to do that in front of guests and say, this is what the dish probably looked like closer in its origin as to what, in comparison to what you might find in some of these restaurants. This is how you make the dish. This is how you can make the dish at home. And then to share, sources with people like Greg Johnsman's Geechee Boy Grits. And, because you could go back to Seattle and take the idea of shrimp and grits and make it with, some instant quick grits and some farm-raised shrimp from Bangladesh, but it's not going to taste like the shrimp and grits that you get here when the corn for the grits is grown in this soil that was specific to the region, went extinct, and is brought back, and the shrimp are from our waters. It's just not going to taste the same. I'm sure it's brilliant. I'm sure it's great, but it's not.
No,
what
it's
it
not
is
the
here.
same.
Yeah.
And we have guests here, for the last couple of days here in the house that we're staying in, and I think we've had grits at a number of the different local areas. You cook grits for us, and being from Texas, it's not really it's not the deep South by any stretch. We don't eat grits on a regular basis.
It raises the question: is Texas the West or is Texas
It
the
does.
South? I think Texas is Texas.
Texas is just Texas, maybe. I don't know. It's home for me. It's hard for me to understand how other people perceive us, and I think there's positives and negatives probably. but at any rate, we don't eat grits. it's just not something that we do. But everybody here is just raved about the grits, and they all have shifted to more of those ancient grains, and it's amazing. It's just amazing.
It's night and day over what
Yeah.
it was.
And y'all all changed that. The chefs of the day, and working through and finding those old grains and bringing them to the surface, and so many other areas where you've brought back real food,
And
it tastes amazing.
They all have their stories.
Yeah.
And what I find a lot of times, even if somebody doesn't have the greatest palate, they'll remember that story when they're like,
Yeah.
this exists because there were only 2 cobs of this corn left.
Yeah,
And from that entire line's been restored.
yeah.
Those
incredible.
are exciting and heroic stories, and the food's a lot more delicious today than it was even 10 years ago.
Oh yeah, I would agree. Yeah. So when you were telling your story about your passion and being able to find, you said that you found, fortunately, something that you were passionate about, but also that there was a demand for. And I agree with that. And I would say further, I think that you specialized too. So there's one thing for there to be demand for something. So for instance, in Charleston, there is a demand for food, and there's a demand for tours, right? But then when you combine that, now you're specializing, and you're not necessarily talking to every single person who comes here on a vacation, right? You're talking specifically to somebody who is very, very interested in food and history to the level that they want to get with the expert on that and experience it. So you've narrowed down actually your potential population of clients. And then what happens when you do that? Your business is even better because you're getting so focused. And I know when we were doing research, when we first did the tour with you a couple of years ago, it was really just a year ago, I think. Yeah, it was just a year ago. That's what resonated with me. I was like, oh, well, this is different. This is
Because it's so niche.
yeah, because I was like, this isn't because I've done tours in Charleston before, and they're great, But I'm like, it's like, man, something different and unique that really hits something that Shelley and I love, And when you can do that effectively, I think that's a business decision within your passion that really can drive a business. I really think that.
It's almost in a way. I mean, I'm sure guests in your audience that are much more familiar with search engine optimization than myself, but my limited experience, because you have to learn all of this stuff as an entrepreneur. So like we talk about keywords and search engine optimization. So, on your pages and your content, while you don't necessarily want to stuff your content full of keywords, it's a best practice to include, like if I'm going to do a blog post, to include that, like I have a little food tour. Or, along some of that should include the words history and that sort of thing. And so the more that those keywords become long tail and specific, then my understanding is that narrows the amount of traffic that's going to your website, but it also more specifically focuses the people that are going to your website, And so it's just I guess there's 2 sides to the same coin. You can cast a really wide net and try to be all things to all people, and there are operators that do that here, or you can do something that's very niche and very specific. And so for me, like, because I'm so small, I mean, I'm a solo operator and I seat 10 guests per day.
Yeah.
Barring if there's an odd number, maybe 11, but really try to cap it at 10. And so because of that, I don't do any paid placements or advertising, or haven't historically, because the traction has been great. But, like everything, we'll see how things play out moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, so you basically, when you are brave and say, no, this is my spot right here. This is my niche right here. It's fewer people that are going to find you, but it's more the right people.
And I mean, I don't think it's like what I do. I don't think it's for everybody. It's a commitment. It's a half a day.
Yeah.
And if you've only got a handful of days or a long weekend in Charleston, that's a commitment.
Oh, it's a full day, because you have to do the walk, and then you have to eat the incredible food, and then you have to take a 2-hour nap.
And then you have to take a nap
Yeah,
afterwards.
yeah.
Because I put the beat down on people.
Well, it's a lot. You go walk and then you eat a whole bunch, have a couple of glasses of wine, and it's like, oh my goodness, you're pretty much worthless after that.
But I don't think it's for everybody, but for the guests that do take it, and for whom it does resonate, it really seems to resonate more deeply with them. And so, if you look at Undiscovered Charleston on Google or on TripAdvisor, on Google, I think I'm all 5 stars, and I'm like right at the 500 review mark a couple of years in. And on TripAdvisor, I think I'm at like almost to 700 at this point, and I've got 1 4-star review and 2 3-star reviews who are both from the same guest. But everything else is 5 stars.
Yeah,
So it's,
no,
and I don't think it's about me. I mean, there's better tour guides in town. There's certainly better chefs in town than me. I think it's about, the need for this kind of model.
Yeah, it's the combination and where you found your niche. Yeah, exactly. Something that I talk about passion a lot, because I talk to business owners about transition a lot. And I have a model kind of that I use, and there's a term, it's called entrepreneurial, it's called enterprise values with an S. And it's about aligning the value of your business with your own personal values. If you're out of alignment, things aren't going to work out so well when you decide to transition. But we talk about the passion a lot. That have that passion that gets you up. That's your fuel, right? We also talk about purpose, and those are 2 different things. And then we have another P we call planning. I'm a financial planner, of course. I'm going to talk about planning. Planning is important. You got to plan this stuff out. But the purpose piece is very interesting sometimes as well, because you have the passion and you love what you're doing. I think of one of my kids was just a passionate volleyball player, right? And I mean, there was no purpose to it. I mean, at the time it was just that. I mean, she just wanted to hit a volleyball 24/7. I mean, literally, that's all she wanted to do. I would come home from work, and she'd be standing there with her volleyball, ready to go. That's passion, right? And then you convert. I think eventually something like that converts over to a purpose, or maybe goes the other way. But in her using Grace as an example, now she has a team, as an adult that she coaches. It's not what she does full time, but she has girls that she's developing
that passion through.
Yeah,
Now as a purpose.
and I think of that as a purpose. And she's an incredible young lady, and I think of her purpose is just as a role model and guiding these girls. Not necessarily just volleyball, but life and things like that. I think it's really cool sometimes when we can really expand into more of that purpose piece too. And for you, it's really clear to me you have just such a true love for the true food and the history, and everybody that comes out of your program, out of your tour, gets that, and then that goes out all over the country. So you're touching 10 people a day or so when you go do this, that go back out and tell, I don't know how many people I've told about the tour, but
Hopefully, yeah, that's
a bunch.
The word of mouth.
And everybody gets this new understanding, and actually maybe certainly don't have it nearly to the level that you do, but we have a part of it, and that's an incredible purpose as well.
That's why I went on my on my business card. You make your own company, you get to come up with your own title.
Yeah.
And so on my business card, it says founder or owner. It says
I've
Chief
got it right here.
Evangelist.
Yes, it does. Founder and Chief Culinary Evangelist. I need water. I can't talk all of a sudden.
So when I was going down the rabbit hole of startup culture, Guy Kawasaki for years was the chief technology evangelist for Apple. Mm-hmm. And he's a really he's a fun guy to follow on LinkedIn. His posts are great. And by the way, if you're ever giving a presentation, his rule on presentations is fantastic. A 3-point rule about how big the lettering should be on the page, how long the presentation should be. And
wow.
can't recall it at this point, but it's if you just Google Guy Kawasaki presentation rules, it'll come up. But his role was chief technology evangelist, and I said, well, if somebody can be a technology evangelist, I can be an evangelist for food and history.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's awesome. Really good. Well, take some time and tell us specifically about your tour, about what you do. If somebody's coming to Charleston, which pretty much everybody should come to Charleston at some point. And I talk to so many people that go, "Oh yeah, I've heard that's a really good place, but I haven't made it there yet." And I always tell them, I'm like, "You need to make it there." But if somebody comes here and they're going to experience Charleston through your eyes, what does that look like?
With the tour, you mean?
Yeah, with the tour.
So the Undiscovered Charleston tour is a half-day experience that includes a 2-hour guided walk through the historic French Quarter and South Abroad areas of Charleston. And then along the way, we see the city from some different perspectives. I like to see the city from different perspectives that you might not from, a busy carriage or van, that kind of thing. So I like to get off the beaten track when I can. I like to explore the history and narratives of people that we don't hear about quite as frequently from the history books, because historically there were so many people here who were marginalized. And then as we get back to the bistro, then I use, with lunch, I try to use the dishes and even the ingredients as a means of connecting some of those dots from the tour in a way that can inspire guests to go home and make those dishes themselves. So I share recipes. I give people my card, my phone number, and I'm like, whether we cooked it today, whether it's Southern or not, if you've got friends coming over for supper, give me a shout, and I'm excited and thrilled to help out however I can. So if you're having the, oh no, I just scorched my grits moment, then I'll tell people, we'll get on a Zoom call and figure it out from there.
Yeah, that's
the phone a friend
great.
moment. So, there's the emotional attachment, and then I think frequently guests leave feeling like they've made a friend. And so, and I kind of feel like that's the case. Like I almost on a daily basis have this pinch me moment where, I'm running the business that I feel like I was meant to run. In a 30-year cooking career, I've never been so thrilled as to be able to say, this is what I was intended to do, and finally in the way in which I was intended to do it. And then when guests leave, they feel like they've made a new friend. And so I'm amazed at the amount of repeat guests that I get.
Yeah.
And how guests will want to continue these conversations and say, hey, I just went to the farmer's market and got a bunch of squash. What do I do with it?
Yeah. Well, give us a kind of a typical menu of maybe what you cook. I know you change it up a lot.
It changes with the seasons, but I always kind of try to hit 3 buckets. So it's a 3-course lunch. Sometimes I'll throw in some bells and whistles, but it's generally 3 courses, and I try to hit 3 buckets. So as a former chef ambassador for the state, I always want to evangelize on behalf of South Carolina agriculture. So I want to source locally from local farms and fishermen whenever I can. I always want to pull from the historic canon of low country dishes. So I'm always trying to do at least one classic dish. I mean, I make a lot of shrimp and grits.
Yeah,
I
sure.
won't lie. But I don't get tired of it because it's such a wonderful thing, and people really, really love it.
Shrimp and grits with bacon in it.
And there's so many really bad and even kind of marginal versions out there, and I'm just like, look, you can make anything you want, and if you do it with care, you could be feeding your family Taco Tuesday, but if you do that with care and with thought, it's going to be delicious.
Yeah.
And then like any other chef, I like to have some fun along the way. And so I like to engage my inner kid. And so, I'll do these plated desserts. Like last night, we enjoyed a variation on a classic Charleston Huguenot torte.
Yeah, but with Captain Crunch.
But with Captain Crunch and Bene seed wafers
And it was
on top
great.
of it. So
Yeah.
it's, and I think if I hit those 3 buckets, if you think of that as kind of a Venn diagram, and we land in the middle of those 3 buckets, then, people tend to leave excited, enthused, and really full and happy.
Yeah. That describes it really well. That meal last night was amazing.
Well, it's because the redfish that y'all caught was freaking fantastic.
We did it up because that was really cool because we went and caught fish and then you cooked it with everything else, and we had plenty of protein. There was
I don't think anybody went hungry last night.
no, not at all. It was amazing. Well, good. Well, if somebody wants to first of all, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, no, I know what I want to ask. Cookbook.
Work in progress. Oh, like what
You got to, you got to do one.
Yeah. So that's a work in progress. I'm building one now. There's two cookbook authors. There's many cookbook authors in Charleston. My good friend John Martin Taylor has been a huge influence on me for years. He ran a cookbook store here in town called Hoppin' John's, and his
John's Goods,
So his first book, Hoppin' John's Low Country Cooking. People ask me on a regular basis if I'm going to buy one Charleston cookbook. That's the one I send them to because his histories are all accurate, the recipes are all tested and true, and the section on pickles alone is just worth how to make your own. It's extensive and it's delicious. So, and John's a good friend, so I'll send anybody to him. The other one is Matt and Ted Lee, the Lee brothers.
Okay.
So they're two brothers that grow up in Charleston and they go off to grad school. And as displaced Southerners, there's things that they, when they're going to grad school in like Iowa, there's things that they grow up with that they can't find. And so they start their famous Lee Brothers Southern Foods catalog. And they become really famous for their writing in the catalog, and that gets them gigs writing for like the New York Times and Food and Wine. And their first cookbook, the Lee Brothers Southern Cookbook, it's expansive, it's huge. So that one, and then there's a later book they followed with called the Lee Brothers Charleston Cookbook. So the Lee Brothers are good friends, and they continue to do important work. And a few years ago, they started their Lee Brothers Cookbook Boot Camp. And so I'd been trying for some years to get into it, but it never quite worked out. And then this past year, I was blessed to spend a week going down the rabbit hole of cookbook writing and publishing. So they've kind of guided me. That was pretty special because, I always thought if you're going to write a cookbook, you write the manuscript for the cookbook and then you try to get it published. And they're like, well, you can, but really what a lot of people do is you write the proposal for the cookbook and then you find an agent and the agent helps you shop the proposal for the cookbook. You get bids from the publishers and then based on those bids, you sign off and then you get an advance on what they think that the cookbook will sell for. And I'm like, you mean you can get paid to write the cookbook as you're writing it?
Yeah,
and
before you wrote it. Yeah.
They're like, yeah, so
Okay.
so Lee Brothers have been great, and I've had these things kind of knocking around my head. And so in many ways, I think I'm in a very unique position because I can use the tour to test the recipes for the cookbook.
Yeah.
I love my industry. I love chef culture, but it's like dealing with chefs is frequently, for those of you who don't know, it's like herding cats because we're also, single-minded and obsessive about things.
Yeah.
And so, it'll be, my goal is to make the only chef-written cookbook in history where the recipes have actually been tested. Because trying to get us to actually like complete a written recipe for a cookbook is like holding someone's feet to the fire, I think sometimes.
Well, it's really hard. So
and that goes back to like just having the discipline to do the diligence and hold yourself accountable and all the things that we don't want to do because we want to go off and instead create some new recipe.
It's really hard. I wrote my first book a few years ago and it nearly killed me. It was so hard.
They say it's like writing a book is like dragging yourself through shards of glass.
Yeah, it's just brutal. And I need to write a second one, and I will, but I just the memory is still there. It just can't.
You hadn't recovered yet.
Yeah, I can't. This is so hard. And then there comes a point, where it's like, okay, are you going to do this or not? And you just lock yourself in a room and just make it happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, you really do need to do that. Regardless of how hard it is, you need to do it because, you write a blog, all that stuff, and you're a chef and you got great
stuff to pull from.
You got tons of stuff. You just got to compile it together, Sounds easy, right?
Of course.
No, it's not. It's not easy at all. But You can do it. Well, that's awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to the cookbook. So keep me posted on that.
I will.
If somebody wants to get in touch with you and talk further about kind of what we've been talking about the passion of what you do, about your tour, about Charleston, any of that kind of stuff, what's a good way for somebody to reach out to you?
There's a messaging page on our homepage of undiscoveredcharleston.com, and there's corresponding social media on Instagram and Facebook, and I do check those messages. So easiest way is just to give me a shout there. And for that matter, if you're coming to Charleston, if you just need a resource, if I can be helpful, if you want strong opinions about where to go, what's good, what's to be avoided, that kind of thing. I won't share those opinions openly on the air, but yeah, I've got a lot of strong opinions. I'd be excited to share them with you.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so we'll put that in the show notes. That's undiscoveredcharleston.com. You can go on there, reach out to Forrest, ask him any question about anything regarding low country food, and he'll have an answer for you.
Come hang out with us in the Low Country. It's delicious. Our history is delicious.
It really is. This is such a special place. I think we're heading back to Texas and here in a few days.
You've got a few days left.
I've got a few days left, and
any hits? Any last minute must dos before you head back?
I don't know. We've done so much. It's really weird. Everybody wants to go to Fort Sumter. We went to, now I can't even think, what's the other fort? At Moultrie. We went to Fort Moultrie. Sure. That was so cool. We went twice.
Sullivan's Island's awesome.
Yeah. And so now somebody locally told me that the real first shot of the Civil War was shot from Fort Johnson, which doesn't exist anymore, on the other side.
Right. So it was fired from Fort Johnson at Fort Sumter.
Right. And if you go over there, you can kind of find where that was. I kind of want to go do that. I want to go.
It's out at the end of Fort Johnson Road. So if you cross the James Island connector to James Island, take a left on Folly Road.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah, I saw where you turn.
And then you can. Yeah. And it's funny too, because if you get on Google Maps or Google Earth, when you're looking down at Charleston, the geography of the Low Country was so extensively transformed because of the war and because of the plantation economy here that you can, from Google Earth, you can see how the face of the planet here has been transformed because of that. You can see like outlines of the old forts and things that are no longer.
Yeah, there's a lot of that out there at Fort Johnson. I want to go see that, and I want to eat some more food. I mean, I've already eaten so much food.
If you're going to Fort Johnson, go see Angela at Workman's Cafe on James Island.
Okay, all right. We will.
That's under the radar, but so delicious.
Okay. Yeah, there's so much to do here. We'll have to come back sometime. Everybody, we really appreciate you being with us on this session as we came to you off locale, I guess you could say, here in Charleston. It's been an incredible experience for us. Forrest, thanks so much for being on today.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
And I want to just remind you, we try to put this out like every other week, with different ideas and concepts on how we all try to make it in this crazy world of being a business owner. And there's just so many different ways to do it, and it's all so exciting. So appreciate everybody being here today with us. We'll talk to you soon. Everybody take care.